It's the West Tigers podcast, episode number 89, on our way towards that the big triple figures, Eddie, big 100. How you going?
Good, thanks, Joel. Might bring that up over the summer. Time flies, but yeah, we're coming ninth, Joel. But it doesn't quite have the same tension attached to the last 2 years, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there's a lot of West Tigers fans, myself included, who probably about 20 minutes into that Souths game, we're feeling quite relieved and wiping the sweat off our brow that we managed to stay in ninth. Because, at that point there, and probably a couple of times in the last few weeks, it's looked like we could be slipping right down the ladder, but somehow we seem to just be like magnetised or superglued into that ninth spot.
And it's not the sort of record, 7 wins and 11 losses that usually guarantees ninth spot. I mean, that's more befitting of a side running probably 11th or 12th. But I looked at the ladder today, Joel, and 13th is on 12 points, which is 1 win behind us, and that's St George Illawarra. And they're about a game behind on for and against, about 20 points. So I know some fans would probably rather not finish ninth, but given the option is ninth or down to 13th, would you rather finish ninth again?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah, of course you would.
Yeah.
What does it matter? It matters very little. Unfortunately, it's not a situation where you get better picks or anything like that.
No,
the lower you run.
We'd be in what's called no man's land. It's lucky, Joel, because in the American drafts, teams start tanking with 6 weeks to go, and you end up in that bottom lower bit. You end up with not the top picks. So
yeah,
maybe there'll be a draft one day. Who knows?
Yeah, it's called the Mitch Moses strategy. Yeah. Before we move on, there's a little bit of recruitment news or not news. Let's say recruitment rumours continuing on. We'll talk about those soon. And we'll also talk about an interesting phenomenon. We put it up on Facebook. I went through all the lists. I don't think I've missed anybody. But I went through and found all the guys that only ever played for Balmain, West or West Tigers. So the West Tigers players that they come from either Balmain or West, or only played for West Tigers in their career. And it's quite an interesting list of players. So we'll go through that soon on the podcast. But the Souths game, Eddie, it was a bizarre game because after half an hour, we were not in the contest. And to be that close at the end was pretty incredible, really.
Well, 20 minutes into the game, Joel, I was thinking this is going to be 50. And I mean, Souths have done that to us once or twice before when they get all the ball and they've got some fast, powerful players and they scored some nice tries. But I think full credit. And I think it shows that even though we're not where we want to be, the reports of, Madge losing the dressing room and stuff like that are greatly exaggerated because last 2 weeks we've been 20-0 down, which is an issue in itself. But I thought even that performance against Souths was a lot better than against Manly. You know what I mean? I mean, that was a step up in class to Manly. And I thought we probably dominated that game for 60 minutes, but you're always going to struggle getting back from 20. And that last little kick, Joel, from Benji, I know he had a good game, but I think I don't know. Some people probably say that's how he plays, but was it the wrong option?
Yeah, of course it was the wrong option. It is. Even when it works, it's the wrong option. When you've only got, you don't have any other chances. Okay, so let's say it's 2 minutes to half time. The game's locked up at 16 all. There's a minute to go, whatever. You might try something like that. But it was just such a low percentage play, and it's been talked about ad nauseum, especially on the forum. But I think it was a brain snap. I don't think that it was. It wasn't the right play, and I was so annoyed at that moment.
Yeah, well, I remember him doing this kick a few times. In round one, he kicked it for Nofoaluma for a try. And I think he was trying to get that angle for it to bounce sort of sideways towards Nofoaluma, but he put way too much weight on it. And what's the third tackle? And we'd had all the ball for the last, 15 or 20 minutes. South looked out on their feet. And you'd think if we just got to the fifth tackle, we might have crashed over just through the hands. But, I mean, Benji, he had a pretty good game in attack. There was some of the old magic. But lives and dies by the sword, and I suppose would you see a Melbourne Storm putting in that sort of kick in the third tackle if they were 2 down? You probably would.
Well, they might do it once, but it wouldn't happen twice under Bellamy. I don't think. It made no sense whatsoever. as you say, South were on the ropes. We were ready. We were coming to get them, and we just anyway. Look, I mean, there's no point talking about it now. It's done. It's dusted. 2 weeks to go, and as we've said time and time again, full credit to Benji for what he's done for the club, and full respect. But in a lot of ways, I'll be quite happy moving on. A lot of people would say, yeah, but he was the person who set up and created our opportunities in that game. But I think my gut feeling is that once you remove Benji from that equation, and we can build the team around a more sustainable, less one-person-centered attack, I think the better off we will be, because you can't put all your eggs, 35-year-olds basket.
Well, it sort of felt like a bit of an audition for him, didn't it? I mean, he's off contract. He wants to play next year. Of course, he's going to want to get the ball 100 times and set up a few tries because, he's going to be in the news. He's been in the news, and that's, he is still a very good ball player and attacking player. But like you said, I think it's the right time. And, maybe going over to England would extend his career for 2 or 3 years, because that's a scene where you can play attacking football and there's high-scoring games, and he might be a smash hit over there.
Eddie, here's a question without notice for you. If he goes and plays a season at Canterbury, is he welcome back at West Tigers after that year as a West Tigers legend, as an employee of the club, an ambassador of the club? I don't feel that way. I don't think he's got the runs in the board after the Auckland Blues situation.
It's a tricky one, because I suppose it was a little different last time, because even though he said the club didn't want him, really he wanted to leave in 2013. He wanted to go something else. He was sulking, whereas this time, the club's told him there's no contract. So I don't begrudge him playing on, but I think if I were him, maybe you'd be thinking about things like that down the track. What is the point of playing 1 year for a Canterbury or a St George or a team that's going to be doing nothing and playing some sort of hot and cold average football for 1 more year? But yeah, I wouldn't go as far as that, Joel. But, there's probably a job waiting for him right now there for life in some capacity, whether it be media or corporate, dealing with fans, dinners, or coaching, if he wants to go into coaching. But, you'd be putting that on hold a little bit by going elsewhere.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Anyway, let's not worry too much about that. Back to the Souths game, I think that a big blow for the Tigers was losing our 2 centres an hour before the game. That certainly didn't help.
Well, I rocked up from cricket training, and I didn't know what had happened. I saw Dewey was back at fullback and Chris Lawrence was in the centres. I thought Madge has produced some sort of stirring magic pot here, and he's changed everything. But the 2 late withdrawals, and I think that probably amplifies the fact that it was a pretty good performance. I thought Dewey has been good, really strong the last 2 weeks. Nofaluma was good again, and we're down to 11 men, Joel. Let's not forget there was a fair bit of passion and feeling out there, which I think Tigers fans enjoyed. And some Tigers fans reckon that's the best thing Luke Brooks has done for the club, throwing a punch at Dane Gagai and showing that sort of passion. I don't know. What did you think? Did he cost the team, or if you get a ball thrown in your face, what are you meant to do?
We've mentioned many times on this podcast the word respect, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that type of thing. I think that you need to make your own respect, and I think it was good on him. I think it was good to see some passion, good to see some fire in the belly, because sometimes what we've seen with this team over the last couple of years is a certain sort of flatness and a certain sort of greyness about them. So it's great to see someone firing.
I loved it, yeah. And he had to go to the Sid Mid because you can't throw a punch these days. But if I get a ball thrown in my face from someone when it's not in the gameplay, that's how people used to react. And I think, we're never going to bring back the Biff, Joel, but that's why a lot of this niggle and push and shove goes on. Back in the day, if you were a winger, there's no way you'd come running in and push someone, say it was a front rower, because you might get knocked out. Whereas now they know they can't sort of get punched, so they come in and act all tough. So I didn't mind it. Yeah.
Speaking of sin bins, I thought Alex Twal's sin bin was A, dumb, and B, extremely costly. They scored that try when he was off. We did well to hold on for about 8 minutes, but it was just dumb. And did you see Nofaluma really get stuck into him when the penalty was given? And he was straight after the incident. He really, really gave it to Twal.
So it's a fine line, because I'm sure the players in that situation are weighing up. Are they certain to score in the next play? Because they made a huge break and we've only got 5 or 6 guys back. I'll cop the penalty. Maybe I'll get away with the sin bin. But Twal he took it too far. Like, he made it obvious.
Yeah.
He sort of went again and again and again. Whereas if he sort of jumped off early, I thought maybe he might have just got penalised. But as much as I hate Ben Cummins, I couldn't argue with that sin bin. But it didn't cost us the game. I suppose it cost us energy and momentum, Joel, didn't it? But we didn't concede, or did we concede the last set before he come back on?
Yeah, just before he came back on.
Yeah. That was insult to injury. Actually, I remember seeing him walking back over the dead ball line just when we conceded. But it was a frantic sort of last 10 or 15 minutes there. I mean, they bombed and had their chances, but not to be in the end. But I thought there were some good performances. I wanted to talk about Harry Grant. I know he's probably not going to be our player in 2 weeks, but geez, I just thought that was an awesome performance. He was just everywhere. I mean, I think he's a special player, the way he backs up kicks, he's chasing everything, running. Really looking forward to seeing him come up against Cameron Smith this week. He'll be up to upstage him. Wouldn't surprise me if he does, one-on-one duel.
Yeah, it should be very interesting. I just wonder if Harry Grant's style of play is sustainable. I mean, he's obviously had a couple of injuries here, and I'm obviously comparing him to Cameron Smith. And I guess that's Melbourne's issue, but I just wonder if he hasn't quite learnt that lesson to just reserve it a little bit at times, where he's just 100% all the time, which I don't know if you can sustain it for a long career.
Interesting point, especially in the middle of the field. He certainly takes off a lot, and he's all action. He gets through the 80 minutes, though. It's not like he's putting his hand up after 45 minutes to come off. And even when he's been shifted out of hooker and stayed on the field, he's looked dangerous for us. So I just think he's a winner and he's a competitor. And, in time, he'll probably learn to temper a little bit of when to go and not. But I'd rather that than the other way around.
We have to give a rap to Adam Doueihi for his goal kicking. Threw a couple of nice passes as well, but Adam Doueihi's goal kicking, I don't know what the magic potion is that they've sprinkled on his foot, but he's hitting them nicely.
Might be just confidence, Joel. Sometimes it's such a mental game, like it's taking penalty goals in soccer and penalty kicks in rugby league. You're all there by yourself and you've got time to think, and there's technique, of course, involved. And Doueihi's technique, I'm no expert in technique, but he still looks like he comes pretty front on and hits it really hard, which can mean it can go awry and missed by a fair way. But look, he certainly hits them better than Moses. Even when Moses was missing, he never looked like a good ball striker to me. Like, he sort of hit them low and flat and off, whereas Doueihi could kick one from 45 metres. What is he, 9 from 9 the last couple of weeks, or 9 from 10? It's been good.
Yeah, I think he missed one against Manly, I think. But, he looks like a goal kicker, where Moses looks like a backup goal kicker.
Well, the whole body language with Moses was there was no reaction to any of his kicks. He looked very reluctant kicker.
Last point on South for me was the form in that second half of Luciano Leilua. I thought he was pretty spectacular on that left edge.
He terrorised them. He's had a really good year, Lucci. I think he ran for 135 metres, but it's not only that. He sort of creates some offloads. He's got the potential to break the line. He's got some ball playing in him. So some fans have sort of wondered whether Madge has, pushed him a bit too far in terms of minutes played. And I've sort of looked at that a little bit the last few weeks and wondered, and people thought he was sort of petering out, but that was a barnstorming second half. I thought Alex Twal and Eisenhuth were pretty good. Some of the other forwards, Joel, have sort of maybe not quite stepped up this year. I don't know, like your McKayleys and Garners, and certainly ET, they're sort of treading water a little bit.
Just back to Luciano Leilua, now that we've had almost a full season, and we had a full season with Ryan Madison, obviously Luciano, the direct replacement for Ryan Madison. I think all things considered, that loss of Ryan Madison hasn't quite been as costly as maybe we thought it was going to be. But he's filled it in quite nicely. Different
style of player, but we got something out of it, didn't we? A player that's going to get better and who's had a good season, and then when we get Stefano next year, you get the other piece of that sort of puzzle. So it's not a loss for us there.
All right, let's move on to 2021 and further on. A rumour going around, there was a report, I believe it was in the Telegraph, in regards to Luke Garner. Luke, of course, played junior football for Manly, and there's some talk that maybe Luke Garner might be wanted back at Manly. He's got a couple of years to run on a contract here. The thought being that he may not be a Madge-style player, and he might free up a bit of money spot in the roster for the West Tigers. I think there's a lot of ducks and drakes going on in the background.
Well, he's that sort of next tier down. I think we've tried hard to move on guys like Packer and Reynolds, maybe Moses, on the big contracts, and those contracts are hard to budge. But, Luke Garner's not on that sort of money, and he hasn't quite nailed down his spot as a long-term starter. He's obviously had potential, but it's a bit of a dirty word, potential. I see him more as an attacking player. I haven't been convinced by his defensive efforts consistently. And a little bit of a front runner, which is not a bad thing. It means when you're dominating, he can really look good. Against Brisbane, he was good, and games were winning by 20 or 30. But it's when you're sort of in those dogfights, is he getting enough meters, or is he making enough impact and tackling consistently enough to be a starting back rower in the NRL? I don't know how many games he's up to now. It'd be probably around 50, Joel. So that's when you start to think and judge a player whether they're going to be a good, consistent first grader. I'm just not quite seeing it yet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are some parts of his game, and we've spoken about them before, especially like the later part of last year. Obviously, that combination with Luke Brooks was something that really made him shine, and that's probably his claim to fame, I guess you'd say at this point, was running those lines off those Luke Brooks passes. But as the year's gone on this year, I think more of his deficiencies have come up. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that he's a good player, but I just don't know if... I think, as we have said 1,000 times before, we have so many guys that offer pretty much the same sort of thing. And I see Luke as being among that group. And if there's an opportunity to play at Manly, and there's an opportunity for us to strengthen other areas with guys like Sean Bloor there, obviously Leilua's got the other second row starting spot tied down. I can sort of see the merit in moving him on, as much as there are parts of his game that I do like.
Yeah, be interesting, because we think there's a experienced front rower coming in, and we're probably going to get we're going to get Musgrove back. So there's a bit of depth there in the forwards, but we're still missing, Joel, at 3 or 4 starters that consistently get 100 metres each week, aren't we? Sort of like you look at some of the top teams and they have those guys averaging it consistently, whereas our guys they compete hard, but they're just not quite at that level yet.
Yeah. So should we keep Garner? Yes, no. If the offer's on the table, see you later.
Yeah, if we get something in return, not necessarily from Manly, Joel, but if we get a Josh Addo-Carr or a Alex Johnson, not an Alex Johnson, he's resigned, but you know what I mean. If we get something that's going to improve the balance, I don't think we're going to miss necessarily a back row.
Yeah, well, that's when I mentioned ducks and drakes. I think you could see a situation where a Garner goes to Manly, an outside back from Manly goes to Melbourne, Josh Addo-Carr comes to West Tigers. I'm sure there's all those sorts of things going on, and that may not be exactly what plays out. There could even be a fourth club in there, and everybody goes around in a circle. But I think that there could be, where there's smoke, there's fire potentially there. James Tamou, the Telegraph came out and said that we've signed him. It's a done deal. Phil Gould got on Twitter and said, "Congratulations, James. Have a great time at the Tigers." But, nothing official at the time of recording from the club. But it's pretty, you'd have to say it's looking pretty certain, despite there not actually being confirmation.
Well, Phil Gould, I'm sure there's a little bit of history there with him and Pascoe and stuff, and I think he would enjoy spoiling the Tigers announcing it themselves. So I'm led to, I think it's probably 100% true, and I hope it is. But, I take it at face value what he said about James Tamou, and he spoke glowingly of him as a leader, a family man, and still a good player, Joel. Averaging 20-plus games a year and consistent year at a club that's in contention for the premiership. So I think he's 31, 2-year deal. That ticks a lot of boxes for me. I think most fans would be pretty happy. I don't want to speak for the fans, Joel, but what do you think?
What I think is that you can't look at it in its on its own merits. I think you have to look at it from the perspective of, if you bring a James Tamou in, that's great, but yet we also need to. I believe we still need that one aggressive prop. Now, Zane Musgrove had a lot of time out of football, but showed some good signs. Injury was that was bad luck for Zane. But if we can put a James Tamou there, fill that void of that other aggressive prop. Maybe it's Stefano. Obviously, that's a lot of expectation, but I think we're a lot stronger. But mostly, mostly for his leadership and mostly if we're getting a player that is a classy, consistent player for a really reasonable amount of money, I think we'd be crazy not to welcome him in.
And it gives the opportunity for guys like Musgrove, McKaylee, maybe even Packer to not bear the burden of maybe being that forward leader. And that might allow them to be more aggressive in their game and have maybe less carries, but more brutal carries, whereas Tama's doing the donkey work and getting you 150 metres. So it has that balancing effect. I think it's really good, and hope it happens.
Yeah, well, I'm sure next podcast we do, we'll be talking about the signing of James Tama. I'm pretty sure. Nothing on Josh Addo-Carr. Rumours that he's already buying a house or looking for a house in Sydney and all that type of stuff. But Melbourne, at this point in time, digging their heels in, saying he's not going anywhere unless we get a replacement. But that could be all in the pipeline. But I'd be very surprised if Josh Addo-Carr doesn't come our way. A lot of people on the forums, you going to his house? Definitely going to his house.
I don't know. With his mate Latrell, I don't think so. I'm pretty confident with this one. I'll throw a few names at you, Joel, and it's just a simple, would you trade this player if it meant we got Josh Addo-Carr next year? Tommy Talau?
Yeah.
Adam Dewey?
No.
Dave Nofaluma?
No.
Paul Momorowski? Trade again. Robert Jennings? I shouldn't laugh.
You could probably put Robert Jennings in that Melbourne team, and he'd probably be a pretty good player, like he was for South.
Yeah, I mean, my point is, the other one was Moses Mbai. I don't think Melbourne will be interested, but Melbourne aren't pushovers. They're probably going to want someone like, a Nofaluma, who we're not going to give up, or a Dewey. That'd be guys that could slot in for them on a wing or in the centres. But yeah, that'll be interesting if push comes to shove and they need to get a player from us in return. Maybe it won't work that way. Yeah, Momorowski hasn't played much football there, has he? He's been injured.
No, exactly. I mean, and the thing is with COVID and everything else going on, I mean, even if in the best of times, you can't just say, well, we want Josh Addo-Carr, so Tommy, there's the Hume Highway, see you later. The guy's got to want to go there, and that's why I think more of a situation where we're horse flesh trading and guys going here and there, and there's probably an outside back out there that would absolutely love to be on the end of that Melbourne back line on that left wing for Melbourne. So I'm sure that'll all work out.
Yeah, I think Adam Hartigan knows what we need. I think we know we need speed in the back line. We need some leadership, and hopefully they're going to be two pieces that fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about the game against Melbourne, the West Tigers players that only ever played for West Tigers or West Balmain and West Tigers, did you look through the list at all, Eddie?
I did. Started off well, that list. There were some premiership winners, Joel, and some players that would have played over 100 games for the club. And then it sort of petered off a little bit to guys that I vaguely remember playing a few games. Yeah, but the thing that stood out was just like, I don't know if loyalty or was a bigger factor back in the early 2000s and stuff, because there were more players from there than, say, they've played in the last 6 or 7 years. You know what I mean?
Well, those grand final winners with Daniel Fitzhenry, Ben Galea, Mark O'Neill, John Skandalis,
Liam Fulton.
And Liam Fulton, yeah. The thing that stands out to me from the list, and I've got to say I'm a bit obsessive about the West Tigers players list. I do update it and I do spend a bit of time looking at it and thinking about it. But the funny thing is that if you look at when these guys played for only West Tigers, so let's say the Mania Cherringtons, Jacob Miller, Sean Meaney, Jack Buchanan, like it was all in a fairly condensed sort of 5 years. We seem to churn a lot of players. They come in, they played somewhere between 1 and 9 games, and then that would sort of be the end of it. But I mean, the last guy that only played for West Tigers and no one else, you're going back probably 7 years, which is really interesting how that's all changed.
Yeah, I wonder if it was the fact that, I mean, a lot of those guys actually played in the Tim Sheens era when we were pretty strong, even though we weren't consistent. It was 3 top 4 finishes, and I wonder if it's because, you know, you have a more established side and maybe some more big guns, and your bottom depth isn't as strong. Whereas now we sort of got an average sort of squad that's stable, but with no real brilliant players. But yeah, there were certainly some names there that some of those names got games in 2010 and 2011 when we made the top four. And like you said, only played 3 or 4 or 5 games and never to be heard of again.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting breakdown.
The reason why I got onto this was because obviously Chris Lawrence is getting only a couple of weeks and he's gone, and obviously Chris has played his whole career here at West Tigers. So that got me thinking about, well, which other people only ever played at West Tigers? There's 3 names here that have lines underneath them and asterisks next to them. Gareth Ellis, Simon Dwyer, and Taniela Tuiaki. 3 quality players, those 3.
Sad, isn't it? You know, I mean, Simon Dwyer, for all a lot of judges thought he would have been an Origin player, certainly had size, you know what I mean? Like, he reminded me a bit of Luke O'Donnell with more brains. Like, you don't often see a forward come in, Joel, that's built like, you know, proverbial. And Taniela, he was a great story. And, you know, those wingers are like gold. We've seen with Parramatta with Rudd Raja and now Mike Acevo, those bulldozer wingers that can also be great try scorers and meter eaters. So, you know, that was an era, 2010-11. They both would have been probably in their prime then. We probably would have pinched another competition with those boys, but not to be.
There's got a few guys here on the list that really bring up a lot of memories from a lot of discussion on the West Tigers forum. And page after page, it seems, of these guys getting lots of talk. Jacob Miller, who I mentioned earlier, Blake Lazarus, and Curtis Rowe. Those 3 guys only ever played for West Tigers, but boy, they were 3 players that had lots of expectation put on them by a lot of people on the forum.
Yeah, I watched the game the other night. Jacob Miller was starting at halfback. I think he's had a long career over there. The game I watched, he wasn't particularly great, but it was funny. He sort of was. I think he might have started the first 5 or 6 games in 2013 under Mick Potter, just after Tim Sheens left, and then he sort of disappeared out of sight. It was rumoured that, you know, Farah didn't think he was up to it or something, but he was quickly gone to the Super League.
Yeah.
And I remember Curtis Rowe and just thinking, you know, if you're going to be that small in this day and age, you've got to have, you know, either great courage or great skill, which is what Brett Hodgson had. And I think, you know, that under-20 style of football doesn't quite translate to NRL if you don't know your way around the field as well.
Yeah.
Blake Lazarus, did he actually? How many first? I don't remember him playing first grade. I remember Curtis Rowe, but I do remember the name and a lot of hype in the juniors about him.
Yeah, well, related to Glenn Lazarus, played a handful of games. I don't remember too much about Blake Lazarus other than reading a lot about him on the forum.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's few, and there was another one who, Jake Mullaney, who I think won when we made a grand final under Todd Payton in the under-20s. I think he was in 2012. I think he was the superstar fullback of the under-20s, and I think Jim Moulton was a superstar fullback in the 20s. Shannon McDonald. I don't know if the 20s was around then, but we sort of had a few of those undersized sort of fullbacks, and they didn't quite turn out what we thought. Although Tedesco wasn't bad, although I suppose he wasn't undersized, was he? He sort of had a bit more size about him.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And he will never be allowed on this exclusive list of guys that only ever wore West Tigers jerseys in the NRL. So it's a pretty interesting list. And if you'd like to go through and have a look at all the names, it's on our Facebook page. Just search for West Tigers Podcast, and you can share some memories. There's a lot of guys here that I have vague memories. I mean, Gray VR. I remember when Gray signed, and he was about the same time as Willie Manu. I mean, we're going back a long way here. But yeah, just another one of those guys that came and only here for a short time, and I think moved on to the Super League. I think,
Yeah, no, I remember. I think both of them might have had the rat's tail or something. They had the funny hair. I remember Willie Manu. Willie Manu was a pretty damaging player when he was young, and he spent a lot of time at Super League as well. So I'm not sure about Gravy Arm, but I know about a year after he left, he was in the Super League, but I can't recall whether he had a stellar career over there or not.
There you go. So we're obviously going to be looking for things like this to discuss as we get into the off season. Even though West Tigers are playing in September, which is a really strange phenomenon, but we will be looking for things to discuss about the history of the West Tigers. So if anybody has any ideas, they can send us a message via Facebook or feedback at westtigerspodcast.com.au. Onto that Storm game, Eddie. Some interesting selections, including the return of the prodigal sons, Big Russell Packer and Josh Reynolds.
I thought about this, and I think it's fine. I think you've got to weigh things up, and they're probably going to be here next year, so you can't have them can you, Joel, just sitting out for a whole year if they're on 800,000 or 700,000. Manchester's got to try and either, one, get some productivity out of them and lead, or two, put them on show for clubs in England or in the NRL that might want to buy them for next year. So I don't have a problem with them starting this game, or Packers on the bench. Reynolds is starting. I mean, at this stage, it looks like the halves next year will be Josh Reynolds and Luke Brooks. So they've got to play together. I know Brooks isn't in this game, but Josh has got to play. So, he's not my favourite player, and neither is Russell Packer. And a lot of Tigers fans, but I don't have an issue with them playing this game. Do you?
Well, I suppose not. I mean, again, as we always say, we don't have a real indication of what's going on in the inner workings of the club. Why guys like Oliver Clark seem to have fallen off the radar. What's the story with Robert Jennings? There's a lot of guys there that I could probably name a few others that just seem to have completely disappeared. And has Russell been injured? Well, what's the go there? Has he overcome an injury? Is that why his lateral defence was so terrible in those games 6 weeks ago? I mean, we just don't know. We don't know what the situation is. I mean, there's probably been more opportunities where you could have played Josh Reynolds off the bench in the last few weeks. Where's Jacob Little? Why did we drop Jacob? Have we finally gone for a bench that's got a bit more thrust on, a bit more size? I mean, there's just a lot of things there that we don't know the mindset and the thought behind these selections. So I don't know. I don't know what. Did he just pick Russell because it's Russell's turn? I don't know.
No, I think there'd be method in the madness. I don't know whether they were sort of in-house dropped for a game after that incident at Brookvale. We don't know that. That could have been the case. We know Luke Brooks is out, so it's logical why Josh Reynolds is back in.
Yeah.
Billy Walters is injured from memory for the season, so there's a lack of options there. I don't mind them putting away Liddell for the year. I mean, the last thing you want is him going into summer as our potentially number one hooker coming off another injury. So I'm fine with that. Harry Grant's been really good all year. Jock Madden's in the 21, so that's interesting. Whether he gets a run off the bench or in the last game, fans sort of want to see that, someone in a key position. I don't know whether he'd be anywhere near ready. Having played no football this year, it'd be mighty hard.
Yeah.
But haven't got a whole lot to lose, have we?
No, we've got absolutely nothing to lose. We always, or traditionally, not always, but traditionally put up a pretty good fight against Melbourne. Are you confident? I mean, I wonder if Melbourne, they're thoroughly professional. I watched them against the Cowboys. They the yin to the West Tigers yang. They really are, because if you ever notice with Melbourne, like when the West Tigers win, 9 times out of 10, it's because we've played out of our skin. Melbourne just does enough every week. They win these games, and they haven't really. They turn it on in patches, and then they just go through their thing. It's a really quite an interesting thing to watch.
Well, it's a couple of things. It's a habit of winning. It's having the same coach for 15 years who demands that excellence. It's having superior players to West Tigers, and it's having I don't want to use the word culture, but it's having that mentality, Joel, where they're rarely conceding more than about 16 points. So they know, if they score 3 tries, they're going to pretty much win the game every week. We don't know that as West Tigers fans. If we score 3 tries, we're guaranteed to win any week.
Yeah.
As much as our defence has got better in patches throughout the last 3 years, there's been a fallback the last 8 weeks. So they are the benchmark in terms of excellence over the past decade, I think. But the ironic thing is, Joel, we tend to trouble them every year. We tend to play them close even when they're right at the top.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it's their style of game. They don't really have those offloading forwards sort of, playing improvisation football, whether they're more structured, and that suits our defence. But, I'm looking forward to the battle in the middle with Harry Grant there and Smith. I don't think we'll win, but I don't think we'll get 50 put on us.
Yeah. It's a hard one to get a gauge on because, as you say, traditionally we've troubled them, and I think it is because we are the oil to their water, the way that we play, just get up in their face, and we always seem to be, traditionally quite often quite up for the game and quite fired up for the game. So, I'm not sure. I'd like to see Jock Madden get a run off the bench. I would have played him instead of Russell. Personally, I would have picked him. But I think if you've got a young guy that hasn't played for a year, to make sure there's no press on him, this is exactly what you would do. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jock Madden does make an appearance off the bench.
No, that's a fair point. It'd be a tough test coming in against Melbourne, but we're running out of time, aren't we? It's Melbourne, then Parramatta, then it's another off-season.
Yeah.
In a long off-season.
Yeah. In a way, I'll be glad to see the end of the season. It's been,
Who's
it's been enjoyable in some ways, but it's been a real grind in other ways.
Who's your tip, Joel? Do you have a tip for the premiership? Not that I really care who wins it. I'd prefer if Parramatta or Penrith don't, but
I think that Melbourne can win the grand final.
I get that feeling that
they're the most consistently good. Obviously, aside from Penrith, but in terms of consistently good over a long period of time, know how to win, know how to get there in the finals and do the job. Penrith, with that young squad, they could go into the finals and just blow everybody away, or they could be, they could crash and burn. That's the proposition. I think the Eels, as I said earlier in the year, you didn't believe me. I said the Eels. I'm not overly sure the Eels have got the staying power, and I've been proven right. Hey, you go. Broken clock's still right twice a day.
They look tired, don't they? They look shot. I mean, that game against Penrith, they probably could have played for 3 days and not scored. I tipped Melbourne at the start of the year, and it was because it was Vunivalu, Addo Carr, and I assume Cameron Smith's last year. So I think their last big chance. And the Roosters obviously losing Cronk and losing Victor Radley mid-season. I think it's just tipped the scales Melbourne's way. And I think Cameron Smith might even be holding off so much because if he wins the comp, he can just ride off into the sunset on a high. I think he's on a mission to do that.
Yeah. Oh, it's all ahead of us. The Parramatta fans can get onto eBay and no doubt sell off their grand final tickets that they bought back in April.
Trying to reverse. Careful, Joel. You'll jinx it. They'll go on a 6-match winning roll if you keep stabbing them.
Oh well, we'll see what happens. I'm willing to stick with my statement. Take it easy, Eddie. We'll catch up again next week.